Lena Collard didn't call the police. She didn't turn off the lights and pretend she wasn't home. The knock came at 11:47 on a Thursday night in November, when the temperature outside Morin Falls had dropped to -19, and the wind off the Laurentians was turning every exposed road into something closer to a river. Lena was still in the garage. She was always still in the garage. The third bay heater had been making a sound like a sick animal since September, and she hadn't had the money to fix it. So she worked in her jacket and kept the radio on loud enough to pretend she didn't notice the cold. She was under a '98 Silverado that belonged to a man named Patrice who'd promised to pay her by Friday when she heard it. Not the knock first, the bikes. The sound of them cutting out, one by one, in the parking strip in front of the building. The silence after was louder than the engines had been. She slid out from under the truck and stood up slowly. Through the one window that wasn't covered in road salt and condensation, she could see the shapes of them in the dark. Big men, leather, at least 6 of them, maybe more. The kind of group that most people in a small town in the Laurentians would look at through a foggy window and decide they hadn't heard anything at all. Lena wiped her hands on a shop rag and walked to the door. She was 26 years old. She had $214 in her checking account and a letter from the Caisse Desjardins sitting on the passenger seat of her truck that she hadn't opened yet because she already knew what it said. She had taken over her uncle's garage 18 months ago when he got sick, and she had been running it alone since the spring. She was the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. But she opened the door. There were 7 of them. The one standing closest to her had a beard that was half frozen and a look on his face that wasn't threatening. It was something past threatening, something closer to desperate. His name, she would learn later, was Darian Price, and he was the road captain of a chapter that had been riding down from Shawinigan when the storm hit. "Our guy's hurt," Darian said. He didn't say please. He didn't say sorry for the hour. He just said it like a fact, the way you'd say the road is iced over or the engine's seized. He came off the bike about 8 clicks back. He rode the rest of the way, but he can't get off the bike now. We need somewhere warm, and we need it now. Lena looked past him at the man still sitting on the furthest motorcycle. Even from that distance, even in the dark, she could see the way he was holding himself. Too still, the kind of still that takes everything a person has. "Get him inside," she said. His name was Cormac Ouellet-Sauvé, and he was 53 years old. And when they got him through the door and onto the bench along the back wall of the shop, Lena could see that his left side was bad. He'd hit something on the road. A guardrail, Darian said, and the ice had done the rest. He hadn't said a word since they'd found him. He was breathing, but it was shallow and careful, the kind of breathing that meant every inhale cost him something. Lena looked at him for 2 seconds. Then she looked at Darian. "Has anyone called an ambulance? We're trying. No signal since Fermaneuve. Guy named Stroud has been riding ahead trying to find one. There's a landline in the office." She was already moving. "Second door on the left. Don't touch the red toolbox." She heard one of them laugh at that, a short surprise sound, and she didn't look back. The ambulance dispatcher told her 45 minutes, minimum. The roads north of Saint-Michel were closed, and they were rerouting everything through La Belle. Lena said fine, told them what she had and what she could see, and hung up. Then she went to the back cabinet under the utility sink where her uncle had kept a first aid kit that was actually stocked because Lena Collard had believed that a real mechanic was ready for real things, and she carried it back out to the bay. "Any of you have medical training?" she asked. A man near the door, tall shaved head, a scar that ran from his left ear to his chin, raised one hand slightly. "Combat medic. CFB Valcartier, 2 tours. Then you're with me. Everybody else, there's a propane heater in the third bay. The red valve on the left. Don't use the blue valve. There's coffee in the office, and I don't care if you drink it. There's a bathroom past the parched shelves. The hot water takes a minute." Nobody moved for a second. "Go," she said, not unkindly. Just clearly they went. The combat medic's name was Bastien Noel, and he knew what he was doing. While Lena held the light and passed him what he asked for, he worked on Cormac with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned to do hard things in worse conditions. 2 cracked ribs, at minimum. Possible internal bruising. The cold had probably kept the swelling down, which was the only mercy the night had offered. Cormac opened his eyes once while they were working on him. He looked up at the ceiling of the garage, the water-stained tiles, the old trouble light Lena had hung on a wire in 1994 that still worked because her uncle had never thrown anything away. And then he looked at Lena. "This your place?" he asked. "Yes," she said. He didn't say thank you. He just looked at her for a moment in a way that was somehow more than thank you. And then he closed his eyes again. Bastien taped his ribs with what they had and got him covered with the emergency blanket from the kit and the spare coveralls. Lena pulled off a hook on the wall. She went and made the coffee. She made enough for everyone. They filled the third bay without quite meaning to. They sat on overturned buckets and on the parts bench and on the floor with their backs against the wall, and they drank Lena's coffee. And they were quiet in the particular way that a group of people are quiet when something serious has just happened and they're all still feeling the edges of it. Lena learned their names one by one without asking for them. They offered names the way people do when they're grateful and don't know what else to give. Darian she already knew, Bastian. A man named Tuck who had enormous hands and who kept looking at Cormac like he was afraid to look away. A woman named Sargent she corrected, just Serge, who was the only one shorter than Lena, and who turned out to be the one who'd organized the group's emergency protocols on the road. A young man, maybe 20, who said his name was Pip and who didn't say anything else and who accepted his coffee with both hands like it was something sacred. And then there was the one who sat across from Lena when she finally sat down herself. He was maybe 60, with gray at his temples and a vest covered in patches she didn't try to read, and he introduced himself as Lena Collard. And he said it the way people say their name when they're used to it meaning something. "You're Noel's kid," he said. It wasn't a question. Lena looked at him. "His niece. I knew your uncle long time ago." Rowan looked around the bay, at the organized rows of tools, the labeled parts bins, the truck in the first bay with the hood still up. He used to say the garage had its own kind of gravity, that everything that needed fixing found its way here eventually. Lena didn't say anything for a moment. "He said that a lot," she finally answered. Rowan nodded. He looked down into his coffee. He was right. The ambulance came at 1:23 in the morning. 2 paramedics, a woman and a man, both of them windburned and moving fast. They got Cormac on the stretcher with practiced efficiency, and Bastian gave them the rundown in calm medical terms that the paramedics clearly appreciated, and then Cormac was on his way out the bay door. He stopped them once on the way out. He looked back at Lena, who was standing with her arms crossed not because she was cold, but because she didn't know what else to do with herself. "What's the name of this place?" he asked. "Collard Mécanique," she said. He repeated it to himself, quiet, like he was making sure he had it right. Then they took him out into the night. The storm didn't break until almost 4 in the morning. By then, 3 of the riders had fallen asleep where they were sitting, and Lena had gone back to working on the Silverado because she worked when she didn't know what else to do. And the garage had gotten quiet in a way that felt less like emptiness and more like something settling. Rowan found her under the truck at around 3. He crouched down and looked at her from the side. "You do this alone?" he asked. "Yes." "Since when?" 18 months. He was quiet, then, "How old are you?" 26. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite anything else. "Noel was 24 when he opened this place," he said. Lena kept working. "The letter on your dash," Rowan said. "Desjardins?" She stopped. Just for a second. Then she kept working. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "I'm behind on the property loan," she said. "Took it to buy the building from my uncle when he got sick. He gave me a price that was too low, and I took it because I'm an idiot. And now the rates have gone up, and I'm short every month by a number that keeps getting bigger." She said it the way she'd said it to no one, because she'd said it to no one. It came out flat and clean like a diagnosis. Rowan didn't say anything right away. "How much?" he asked. "Enough," she said. "Go to sleep, Rowan." He stood up. She heard him walk away. She kept working until the storm broke, and the first pale gray light came through the window that wasn't fogged over. And then she stood up and turned off the radio and stood in the quiet for a while. They left at first light. All 6 of them, Cormac's bike towed behind Tuck's on a strap, moving slow and careful on the roads that were now passable but still treacherous. Darian stopped at the bay door before he left and held out his hand. "We don't forget," he said. "That's not something we do." Lena shook his hand. "Roads are clearer towards St. Agathe," she said. "Stick to the 1-7 till you get to the junction." He nodded. He went. Rowan was last. He stopped and looked at her the same way Cormac had, that same way of looking that was more than thank you. "Your uncle was one of the good ones," he said. "I know," Lena said. He left. The sound of the bikes faded south and then disappeared completely, and the garage was just a garage again, cold and familiar in hers. She stood there for a while. Then she went inside and poured the last of the coffee and sat in the office chair and looked at the Desjardins letter for the first time without touching it. And then she put her head down on the desk and slept. She almost missed it. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning when the temperature had finally climbed back above 0, and she had 4 cars in and 2 promised for the afternoon, she looked up from the invoice she was writing and saw them. Not 7, not a dozen. She walked to the bay door and opened it and stood on the concrete apron and looked. The road in front of Collard Mécanique was full of motorcycles, as far as she could see in both directions, past the hardware store, past the dépanneur, up toward the hill where the road curved, bikes, parked and still arriving, engines cutting out one by one in a rhythm that took almost 10 minutes to finish. She would count later, or try to. The number she kept coming back to was 312. But Serge, who had organized the whole thing, would tell her afterward it was closer to 340. The number didn't matter, except that it did, in the way that numbers matter when they're made of people. Darian walked up to her first. He looked better than he had 3 weeks ago. Less frozen. He was carrying a folder. "Cormac's out of the hospital," he said. 2 ribs. No internal bleeding. "He's home." "I'm glad," Lena said, and she meant it. Darian handed her the folder. Inside was a printout from the case Desjardins. A payment confirmation. The number at the bottom made her look up at him. "That's," she started. 6 months of your shortfall rounded up," he said. Rowan did the math. "We did a collection. Chapters from Shawinigan, Trois-Rivières, Joliette, Gatineau. Some guys from the Ontario side who heard about it. He paused, and Cormac contributed what he said was an appropriate amount for the cost of a bench and a coffee, and someone who didn't slam the door in his face. Lena looked at the folder. She looked at the road. She looked at 340 motorcycles, or thereabouts, all of them there because someone had opened a door at 11:47 on a Thursday night in November. I don't know what to say, she said. You don't have to say anything, Darian said. Rowan said you'd say that. He also said to tell you that the garage has its own kind of gravity. She laughed then, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and unexpected, and she pressed her hand flat against her sternum for a moment because the feeling there was almost too large for the space it was in. Bastien was there somewhere in the crowd, Tuck, Serge who gave her a short nod from 20 feet away, Pip who waved both hands. And then a man she didn't immediately recognize walked up from the edge of the group. Walking carefully, one hand on his ribs but walking. And she knew him anyway, because there was only one person it could be. Cormac Welle-Sauvé looked better than he had on her shop bench, though the comparison was not a difficult one to win. He was a large man made somehow careful by what had happened to him. He stopped in front of her and looked at her the same way he had that night, direct and without fuss. I made a promise to myself in the hospital, he said, that I was going to come back here and shake your hand and look you in the eye. Lena held out her hand. He took it. The ceiling of your garage, he said, is the first thing I'm going to remember for the rest of my life every time I need to remember that people are worth something. She didn't have an answer for that. She wasn't sure there was one. She looked out at the road again. 340 motorcycles, more or less, in front of a building that was worth fighting for. In a town that had just gotten a little larger than it had been the day before. Later, much later, after the coffee she'd made and every pot she had was gone. After handshakes and names she'd never remember, and names she would... After Cormac had posed for a photograph in front of the Collard Mécanique sign that someone posted somewhere, and that she wouldn't see for another 2 weeks. She went back into the garage and stood in the middle of the floor. Everything was as she'd left it. The Silverado was gone, finally paid for. There was a Subaru Forester in the first bay with a transmission problem she was looking forward to solving. The third bay heater was still making its sick animal sound. She'd get to that next. She picked up a wrench, and she got back to work.